The office was still half asleep when Emma Carter walked in, holding her coffee the way people hold courage carefully, afraid it might spill. 4 years in the same corner desk, same quiet mornings, same man behind the glass door who ruled her days with calm precision. Ethan Blake, the kind of man who made silence feel like an order. But that morning, something felt different. The air was thicker, the ticking clock louder. Even her own heartbeat seemed to echo against the marble floor. She didn't know that before the day ended, her name would no longer appear on the company list. She didn't know that the man she had served, admired, and quietly loved would look at her with eyes that carried both an ending and a beginning. Sometimes life doesn't fall apart. Sometimes it simply turns a corner you never expected, and what waits there changes everything you believe about love, dignity, and second chances. This is not just a story about a billionaire and his secretary. It's a story about what happens when respect grows into something deeper, when silence hides a promise, and when one bold decision rewrites 2 lives forever. So, take a deep breath, because this story begins. The moment Emma Carter hears the words, "You're fired," the sound of the elevator chimes softly at 7:58. Always 7:58, never earlier, never late. Emma Carter stepped out, her heels tapping a steady rhythm against the marble floor of Blake Innovations. She carried a tray with 2 coffees, one black, one with oat milk, and a single packet of sugar, and a folder tucked neatly under her arm. Her badge glinted under the cool morning light as she crossed the wide, glass-walled lobby, nodding politely to the security guard, who always greeted her with a quiet, "Morning, Miss Carter." She smiled back, the same warm, contained smile she'd used for 4 years. Up on the 42nd floor, the world smelled like glass cleaner, ambition, and fresh paper. The hum of printers mixed with the distant murmur of phones. Everything about this place moved with precision, like the man who owned it, Ethan Blake. Emma had learned to read his moods not through words, but through silence. The way he set his pen down meant he wanted a report revised. The way he rubbed his temple meant he hadn't eaten yet. And when he stood by the window with his hands in his pockets, staring out at the skyline, she knew something heavy was sitting in his chest. No one else ever noticed, but she did. She placed the coffees on his desk, black on the right, oat milk on the left, then adjusted the blinds by exactly 2 inches. He preferred the light soft in the mornings. "Good morning, Mr. Blake," she said softly. He didn't look up right away. He never did. Just a quiet, "Thank you." "Emma." His voice carried the low, composed calm that made every other assistant before her crumble. But Emma had learned to find comfort in that calm, even if sometimes. It left her wondering what it might sound like if he ever let it break. She turned to leave, but his voice stopped her. "Emma?" Her hand froze on the door handle. "Yes, sir." He looked up, eyes gray as rain clouds, studying her for a moment too long. There was something unreadable there, something she couldn't quite name. Then he said simply, "Cancel my 11 o'clock, reschedule for tomorrow." She nodded, writing it down immediately. "Yes, sir." As she left, her reflection caught on the glass wall. Small frame, chestnut hair tied neatly, face calm, eyes quietly tired. She looked like someone who belonged everywhere and nowhere at once. By 10, the office was in full motion. Ethan's name echoed down corridors, people whispering about him, about the new project, about another round of layoffs. Emma kept her head down, typing, answering calls, smoothing schedules, shielding her boss from chaos the way she always had. It was strange, she thought, how invisible dedication could be, how her life had shrunk into an exact science of timing, tone, and silence, all to make another person's world run flawlessly. At noon, while checking through Ethan's lunch order, she overheard 2 executives near the coffee machine. 4 years, one said. "Can you imagine working for him that long? She's either a saint or a fool," the other replied. They laughed the quiet, careless laugh of people who never looked past their own reflection. Emma pretended not to hear. She stirred her tea slowly, let the spoon click once against the mug, then walked away. Back in Ethan's office, he was on the phone, voice controlled, words clipped. No. Anderson, we don't delay the release. If you're not ready, find someone who is. He hung up, exhaled, and glanced at Emma. Rough day, she asked gently. His lips curved, not quite a smile. Just another day. She nodded. I moved your 3:30 to next week, and the investors' dinner confirmed for Friday. Thank you. He paused. You always seem to know what I need before I do. She looked at him then, surprised by the softness in his tone. It's my job. He held her gaze for a beat longer than usual. Maybe it's more than that. The air in the room changed, something unspoken hanging between them, fragile and unfamiliar. Emma quickly looked down, busying herself with the files. Would you like your lunch in the conference room? She asked. He hesitated. Here is fine. When she left, her pulse was unsteady, her mind filled with thoughts she didn't have time for. By late afternoon, a storm began to build outside, gray clouds pressing low over the city. The reflection of lightning flickered across the office glass. Emma stayed late, as she always did, finishing notes and emails while most of the staff had already gone home. She liked the quiet. The world felt softer when the computers dimmed, when all that was left was the rain tapping gently against the windows. Ethan's door opened behind her. You're still here? She turned. I was just wrapping up. He stood there for a moment, sleeves rolled, tie loosened. The stormlight made him look different, less like the man who owned half the city, more like someone who'd simply forgotten how to rest. You don't have to stay this late every night, he said. I know, she replied, but if I leave early, you'll skip dinner. A quiet laugh escaped him, low, unexpected. You keep track of that too. Someone has to. He looked at her then, a strange warmth in his eyes, the kind that made her forget how many steps it took from her desk to his door. For a second, it felt like the whole world existed in that small space between them. Then the phone rang. He turned away, voice sharp again, all business, and just like that, the moment vanished. Emma gathered her things, slipping on her coat, her reflection ghosted against the darkened glass. Outside, the rain had turned heavier. She hesitated at the elevator, glancing back at the office lights still on, Ethan still on the phone, pacing slowly. She thought about the life she led, precise, predictable, safe, and yet, somewhere deep inside, a quiet ache whispered that something was missing. As the elevator doors slid shut, she couldn't shake the feeling that the next time they opened, nothing in her life would ever be quite the same again. Rain still lingered on the window glass the next morning, leaving faint silver trails that caught the light. Ethan stood by that window, one hand resting in his pocket, the other holding a cup of coffee that had long gone cold. From up here, the city looked smaller, quieter, almost fragile, like a machine that would stop running if he ever stopped pushing. He built this view. Every inch of the glass tower that carried his name was born from long nights in a cramped apartment, when sleep was a luxury and success was just a dream printed on a napkin. He had started Blake Innovations with one old laptop and a head full of impossible ideas. Now it was a billion-dollar empire. But for all that power, mornings still felt strangely empty. He watched people hurrying below, tiny, purposeful dots in gray coats, and for a second, he envied them. People who worked because they had to, who loved because they wanted to, who didn't wake up wondering if everyone in the room feared them a little too much. His phone buzzed once, a reminder board meeting in 20 minutes. He turned from the window, his jaw tightening as he glanced at the files on his desk, every paper signed, every detail in order. He had built his life on control. There was no room for uncertainty, no space for sentiment. Yet, somehow, every time his assistant walked in, that rule cracked just a little. Emma Carter. Even her name sounded steady. She was already at her desk when he stepped out, typing quietly, posture straight, hair tucked neatly behind her ear. The faint scent of her perfume, something like white tea and rain, floated in the air. Ethan passed by, giving a short nod, the same professional gesture as always. But his eyes lingered half a heartbeat longer than they should have. She looked up. Their gazes met briefly. Her lips curved into a polite smile, and he felt something shift inside his chest, something he didn't care to name. "Good morning, Mr. Blake." "Morning," he replied, his voice even, though his pulse betrayed him. She handed him the updated agenda, each page clipped neatly, color-coded the way he liked. He didn't have to check. He knew it was perfect. And the investor dinner confirmed for Friday, 7 o'clock. I also called ahead to request a quiet table. He paused, eyes narrowing slightly. "You always think ahead. It's part of the job," she said softly. "No," he murmured under his breath, almost to himself. "It's part of who you are." She didn't hear him, or maybe she pretended not to. Either way, the silence that followed felt like something delicate, like breath suspended between two words that neither dared to say. When Ethan entered the conference room, the noise dimmed. Conversation stopped mid-sentence. People straightened in their chairs, waiting. He never raised his voice, never needed to. Authority followed him like a shadow. "Let's begin," he said, his tone calm but unyielding. The meeting dragged on, full of graphs, projections, and nervous glances. Ethan listened, spoke little, corrected numbers, adjusted timelines. Every decision came out sharp and precise, leaving no room for argument. Yet behind that polished command, his mind drifted back, again and again, to the sound of Emma's voice that morning, gentle, measured, grounding. When the meeting ended, he remained seated, hands clasped, staring at the screen. For a man who controlled empires, he felt disturbingly powerless over the one thing he wanted to control most, his own thoughts. He had hired Emma 4 years ago. She'd been 24 then. Shy but sharp, her resume ordinary, her composure remarkable. He remembered the way she'd said, "I don't make mistakes twice," and how he'd believed her. Since then, she had become the rhythm of his days. Coffee at 8, notes at 9, reports before noon, a quiet good night before leaving at 7:30. She never crossed boundaries, never faltered. She was the one constant in a life made of chaos. And lately, that constancy had begun to feel dangerous. At noon, he walked past the break room and caught her laughing softly with someone from accounting. It was a small laugh light, easy, but it stirred something sharp in him. He didn't like hearing it directed at anyone else. Ridiculous, he thought, irritated with himself. She's your employee, not your concern. Still, that laugh followed him down the hall like an echo that refused to fade. Back in his office, he loosened his tie and stared at the reflection in the glass. To the world, he was power. To investors, a visionary. To the media, the golden boy of tech. But inside these walls, facing that reflection, he sometimes wondered when exactly he'd stopped being human. A knock broke his thoughts. "Come in." Emma stepped inside, holding a folder. "The quarterly numbers you asked for." Her voice was soft, careful, like she always measured her words before offering them. He took the file. Their fingers brushed just for a second, and it felt absurd that something so small could send his heart off rhythm. "Thank you," he said, forcing calm. "You're welcome." She turned to leave, then hesitated. "You should eat something. It's almost 2. "I'm fine. You said that yesterday." A tiny smile touched her lips before she disappeared through the door. He stared after her, caught between admiration and unease. She noticed everything, even the things he tried to hide. The rain had stopped by evening, leaving the air sharp and clean. From his office window, the skyline shimmered under the fading sun. He watched the city lights blink on one by one, like quiet promises. Behind him, Emma's desk was empty, her chair neatly pushed in, her computer shut down. The small vase of flowers she kept beside her monitor, white daisies this week, tilted slightly, catching the last glow of daylight. Ethan sat down, leaning back, letting out a breath he hadn't realized he'd been holding. Power, he thought, could build everything except peace. He had all the control a man could dream of, yet one simple thought of her could undo it all. He closed his eyes, fingers resting against his temple. Maybe it was time to set boundaries again. Maybe it was already too late. The sound of the cleaning crew moving quietly in the hallway drifted through the open door. A vacuum hum, a soft clatter of supplies. The day was ending, but for Ethan Blake, something unseen had just begun to stir, something that would soon tear down every wall he'd spent a lifetime building. And somewhere in the stillness, he knew it had her name. The sun poured through the wide office windows in thin, golden lines. Dust floated in the light like tiny, weightless secrets. Emma stood at her desk, typing, the rhythmic sound of the keys steadying her thoughts. Everything about the morning was familiar, the soft hum of the AC, the faint scent of cedar from the polished floors, the ticking clock that always ran 3 minutes fast. Then, the phone on her desk lit up. A single line of text appeared. Mr. Blake requests you in his office. Her hands froze above the keyboard. Something about that message, short, unusually formal, made her heart skip. She took a quiet breath, straightened her blouse, and walked toward the heavy glass door. Inside, Ethan was standing by the window again, sleeves rolled, tie loosened. The city stretched far below him, all motion and distance. Yet the room itself felt still almost waiting. He didn't turn as she entered, closed the door. Emma? The latch clicked softly behind her. She waited, silent, finally. He spoke slow, deliberate, his back still to her. How long have you worked for me? 4 years, she replied, voice steady but quiet. He nodded once. 4 years. His reflection in the glass looked distant, almost like someone else entirely. You've been extraordinary. She blinked. Compliments from Ethan Blake were rarer than summer snow. Thank you, sir. He turned then, and his eyes met hers. Cold gray, but not empty. Something stirred beneath the calm, something she had never seen before. Emma Carter, he said softly. You're fired. The words hit like a blow. For a heartbeat, she didn't move. The air in the room seemed to vanish. Fired. It echoed in her mind, sharp and hollow. She opened her mouth, but no sound came out. Ethan watched her closely, his expression unreadable. Then, before she could speak, he added quieter this time. Because I can't keep you as my assistant anymore. Her chest tightened. I don't understand. He took a slow step closer, every inch of him measured and certain. I can't treat you as an employee when every time you walk into this room. I forget what I was about to say. Her breath caught. He stopped a few feet away, voice barely above a whisper now. I can't think of quarterly reports when all I can think about is you. Emma stared at him, eyes wide. The steady rhythm of her heart turned wild, uneven. Ethan! He reached into his pocket and pulled out a small velvet box. It looked out of place in this world of contracts and codes, something soft in a room built on control. He opened it. Inside, a sapphire ring gleamed under the light deep blue, steady, alive. I'm firing you, he said, and a faint, fragile smile touched his lips. Because I want you to be something else entirely. The words trembled in the air between them. I want you to be my wife. For a long moment, the room held its breath. The hum of the city faded. The ticking clock stopped existing. There was only the sound of her pulse, loud and unbelieving. Emma's first instinct was to laugh, not because it was funny, but because her body didn't know what else to do with the shock. This isn't a joke. Does it sound like one? She looked at him, really looked, the man who never stumbled over words, who commanded rooms with silence. And yet, standing there now, he looked like someone who just laid down his armor. Her throat tightened. You're serious? I've never been more serious about anything in my life. His voice trembled just slightly enough for her to feel it. She shook her head, trying to catch her breath. You can't just, Ethan. You can't fire your assistant and propose in the same sentence. That's not how life works. Life, he said quietly, hasn't worked the way I expected since you walked into it. He placed the ring box on the desk, carefully, as if it were something sacred. I know how it sounds. I know what people will think. But I also know what I feel. And I can't keep pretending I don't. The world seemed to tilt. Emma backed up slightly, needing space to breathe. All the rules she had built, professionalism, distance, composure were crumbling one by one. Her voice came out small, trembling. You're my boss. Ethan, my whole life is built around keeping your world in order. You can't just change that. He stepped closer again, gently, not to overpower, but to reach her. Emma, you already hold my world together. I just want you to hold it differently. Her eyes burned. Tears threatened, but she blinked them back. You don't even know what you're asking. I do, he said softly. I'm asking you to trust me. For a moment, silence stretched not cold, but alive. Their breaths mingled in that narrow space between fear and hope. Then Emma looked down at the ring, its sapphire glinting like a piece of the night sky caught in daylight. Why me, she whispered. You could have anyone. Ethan smiled the kind of smile that belonged to the man she'd never seen before. Because you never wanted anything from me. You saw the man, not the money. And somehow, that's what makes me feel free. Her heart ached for years. She had kept her feelings buried beneath calendars and conference calls. She had convinced herself that admiration wasn't love, that loyalty wasn't longing, but now, facing him, she realized how deep those quiet roots had grown. Still, fear lingered, the weight of what this meant, the whispers, the judgment, the possibility of being nothing more than a scandal in his perfect world. I need time, she said softly. Ethan nodded, his gaze steady. Take it. I'll wait. He closed the box gently and handed it to her. No contracts, no expectations, just possibility. Her fingers brushed his as she took it. That small touch felt louder than all the words they hadn't said. When she finally turned to leave, her hand trembled slightly on the doorknob. Behind her, Ethan's voice broke the silence once more, low, certain. Whatever you decide, Emma, you've already changed everything. She paused, eyes closing for just a heartbeat. Outside, the office buzzed on as if nothing had happened, phones ringing, printers whirring, lives continuing. But for Emma Carter, the world had quietly shifted. She clutched the small velvet box against her chest, its weight both terrifying and tender. And as she walked back to her desk, one thought whispered through her like a secret she wasn't ready to speak aloud. Nothing, from this moment on, would ever be the same. The world outside Ethan's office had already faded into twilight, streaks of amber light slipping through the blinds and brushing across the floor. The city hummed in the distance, soft and far away. Inside, everything felt suspended quiet, heavy with what had been said and what was still unsaid. Emma stood by the door, the small velvet box still in her hand. Her pulse had not settled since he'd given it to her. Every beat felt too loud in the silence. Ethan sat behind his desk now, hands clasped, watching her the way one watches a decision form, afraid to move, afraid to break it. I don't understand, she finally whispered, voice trembling just enough to betray her calm. You're offering me a ring, but why does this feel like there's more? Ethan didn't answer right away. Instead, he opened the drawer beside him and pulled out a folder, sleek, thick paper, gold seal, a contract. He set it beside the ring box and slid both toward her. She frowned, hesitant. What is this? Read it, he said quietly. Emma's eyes moved over the page. The numbers didn't register at first. They couldn't. Her brain refused to make sense of them. 20%. 20% of Blake Innovations. Her head snapped up. Ethan, this can't be. It's real, but that's impossible. I'm not. Not what his voice softened. Not worth it. She shook her head, stepping back a little as if the paper itself might burn her. You can't just give something like this away. I'm not giving it away, he said. I'm choosing to share it with the one person who's earned it more than anyone else. Her throat tightened. Earned it, Ethan? I'm your assistant. I bring you coffee. I manage schedules. You built this place with me, he interrupted gently. Every late night, every mistake caught before it ruined a deal, every quiet word that steadied me when the world demanded too much. You think I didn't notice you've been the backbone of this company since the day you walked in? The honesty in his tone left no room for defense. Emma stared at the contract, the words swimming before her eyes. She didn't know whether to cry or laugh. The world she knew, the one built on rules and distance and professionalism, had just cracked open. He rose from his chair and came around the desk, stopping a few feet from her, close enough for her to feel the warmth of his presence, the quiet steadiness of him. This, he said, tapping the folder lightly, is not charity. It's not pity. And it's not a game. It's my way of saying thank you for believing in something I nearly lost faith in. She looked up, meeting his gaze. The ring caught a glint of light between them, sapphire glowing like a drop of ocean. I don't want this, she said softly, her voice breaking. Not like this. His brows drew together. Why not? Because it feels like a transaction. She took a shaky breath. Like you're trying to buy something that shouldn't be bought. He looked almost wounded, but not angry. I'm not trying to buy you, Emma. I'm trying to honor you. Her eyes glistened. Then just say it. Don't turn it into papers and signatures. The room fell still. Ethan's gaze softened, and for the first time, she saw vulnerability flicker across his face, something raw, almost boyish. He reached for the ring box, opened it, and held it in his palm. You think I'm good at showing emotion? He smiled faintly. I'm not. I've spent most of my life negotiating, fixing, controlling, but with you, I can't seem to do any of that. Every time I look at you, the world I built so carefully just slips out of focus. He took a slow breath, as though choosing each word carefully. This ring, this contract, they're not about ownership. They're about trust. You gave me loyalty when I didn't deserve it. You gave me patience when I had none. And you made this place, my life, feel human again. His voice broke slightly. It's not a favor. It's a promise. Emma couldn't speak. Her eyes stayed fixed on the sapphire blue and calm, the color of everything she didn't know how to believe in anymore. Outside, thunder rumbled faintly, a storm gathering somewhere beyond the glass walls. She finally found her voice, quiet and uncertain. If I say no, then I'll respect that, he said, and we go back to being who we were. But if you say yes, he looked at her then, the way a man looks at something he's been searching for without knowing what it was. If you say yes, I want to spend the rest of my life trying to prove that I meant every word. The air felt thick, heavy, alive. Emma set the contract down slowly. Her hands trembled. You're asking me to step into a world I don't belong to. You already belong to it, he whispered. You've just never let yourself see it. Her lips parted, but no answer came, only a small, quiet sound, half sigh, half disbelief. For a long while, neither spoke. The rain began, tapping softly against the windows like a heartbeat. Finally, Ethan closed the distance between them. He didn't touch her, not yet. He only looked into her eyes, waiting for permission. You don't have to give me an answer tonight, he said, but know this. Emma, you've never been invisible to me, not for 1 second. Something inside her broke not in pain, but in release. The walls she'd built for years, the careful distance, the professionalism, all of it wavered. She looked up at him, her voice barely more than a breath. You really mean this, don't you? He smiled, small and certain. With everything I have. Then he placed the sapphire ring in her palm, closing her fingers gently around it. It's yours to keep, whether you wear it or not. Her heart pounded in her chest. The storm outside deepened, thunder rolling low like an echo of everything unsaid. She looked at him one last time, searching his face for any trace of doubt, but there was none. Only warmth, only truth. When she finally left the office, the ring still in her hand, she felt the world tilt again, not violently this time, but with quiet inevitability. Somewhere deep inside, she knew this was no longer a story about power or position. It was about two people standing at the edge of something that terrified them both. And as the elevator doors closed, Emma whispered to herself, barely audible, maybe I was never just his assistant. The sapphire ring lay on the table beside her untouched cup of coffee. The light from the cafe window caught the stone and turned it into a tiny pool of blue fire. Emma stared at it, still not believing it was real. The world outside moved like a dream. Buses humming by, people crossing the street, a child laughing somewhere far away. But inside, everything in her chest felt too still, too heavy. Across from her, Lily sat with her chin resting on her hand, watching her with the half-smile of someone who had seen this coming long before Emma did. "You look like someone just told you the sky isn't blue anymore," she said softly. Emma exhaled a shaky breath. "It feels like that? Lily, I don't even know where to start. Start with the part where the most composed man in New York asked you to marry him." "It wasn't like that," Emma said quickly. "It wasn't romantic. It was surreal. One second I'm at work, and the next, he's telling me I'm fired because he can't be my boss anymore." Lily's eyebrows lifted. "And then he proposed," Emma nodded, almost whispering, "and offered me 20% of his company." Lily let out a low whistle. "Well, that's one way to say, 'I love you.'" Emma rubbed her forehead, her hands trembling slightly. "That's just it. I don't know if that's what he meant. What if it's pity? What if it's some kind of impulsive guilt? Maybe he's just tired, and I happen to be standing there." Lily leaned forward, her tone calm but firm. "Emma, you've worked with him for 4 years. You think Ethan Blake does anything impulsively?" Emma's eyes drifted to the ring again, the sapphire shimmering quietly. "I don't belong in his world. Lily. His friends wear tailored suits and talk about mergers. I buy my shoes on clearance and live in a one-bedroom apartment that still smells like old paint." "Maybe that's exactly why he loves you," Lily said. "Because you're real? Because you never asked for anything." The words hit deep, but Emma shook her head. "People like Ethan don't marry women like me. They marry people who belong in magazines, not behind desks." Lily chuckled, stirring her coffee lazily. "You sound like a cliché." Emma frowned. "I'm serious." "I know," Lily said gently. "That's why it breaks my heart a little. You've stood beside him for years, keeping everything together. You think that kind of loyalty goes unnoticed? You think love can't grow in quiet spaces?" Emma looked down, her eyes burning. "Maybe I'm scared it's all a mistake, that I'll wake up tomorrow, and he'll realize I'm not enough." Lily reached across the table and took her hand. "Emma, he didn't fall for someone else's version of you. He fell for the woman who stays late, who notices the small things no one else does. That's the version he sees." For a while, neither of them spoke. The cafe buzzed softly with the sound of cups clinking and pages turning. Then Lily smiled faintly. "Do you remember senior year? When you got that internship and thought you weren't smart enough?" Emma laughed under her breath. "You made me write that list 10 reasons why I was wrong." Lily grinned. "Exactly. I think it's time for another list." Emma tilted her head. "A list of what reasons why you're not the imposter you think you are." Emma gave her a look somewhere between amusement and disbelief. "You're serious," as a heart attack. They spent the next few minutes scribbling on napkins' messy handwriting, half-finished sentences. Lily wrote first, "Because you've built your own life without shortcuts," Emma added. "Because you never treated anyone like they were beneath you." Lily wrote again, "Because you made a man who forgot how to feel. Feel again." That last line made Emma go quiet. She stared at it for a long moment, her chest tightening. Lily leaned back, her voice softening. You don't need to prove you belong in his world. Emma. Maybe what he needs is someone who reminds him of the world outside of it. Emma blinked back tears. What if I say yes, and it changes everything? What if I lose myself trying to fit into his life? Then make sure you don't, Lily said simply. Keep your voice, your friends, your roots. Don't let love turn you into something smaller. The right man won't ask you to shrink. For the first time all day, Emma smiled, a small, tired smile, but real. The rain had stopped outside. The sky glowed pale gold over the city rooftops. She turned the ring between her fingers, the sapphire catching the light and scattering it into a dozen shades of blue. Lily sipped the last of her coffee and studied her. You're thinking about him, aren't you? Emma nodded. He looked different. Lily. Not like the man in the news or the boardroom. Just human. Like he was scared, too. That's how you know it's real, Lily whispered. Emma laughed softly. You always make things sound simple. That's my job. They both sat there for a while, watching people walk by the rain-speckled window, a woman carrying flowers, a man chasing a bus. Life, unbothered and constant. Finally, Emma picked up the ring and slipped it back into its box. She didn't put it on. Not yet. Lily watched her, curiosity flickering in her eyes. What are you going to do? Emma closed the box slowly, the click of it echoing like a promise she wasn't ready to make. I don't know, but for the first time, I want to find out what I really want, not what I'm afraid of. Lily smiled, proud and quiet. That's the Emma I remember. Outside, the late afternoon light turned soft and forgiving. Emma stood, pulling her coat tighter. Thank you, she murmured. For what? For reminding me who I am. Lily squeezed her hand. Don't forget. Okay, you've already earned your place in his story. Now, it's time to write your own chapter. Emma walked out into the fading light, the ring box in her pocket, her heart a mixture of fear and something that felt dangerously like hope. As she crossed the street, the sky broke open with color pink, gold, the faintest shade of blue. And in that moment, she couldn't help but think maybe, just maybe, the world was finally turning toward her. The city was already asleep when Emma finally sat on the edge of her bed, her coat still on, her hair damp from the light drizzle outside. The small apartment was quiet except for the faint hum of the refrigerator and the steady ticking of the clock above the sink. Midnight had come and gone, but her mind refused to rest. The sapphire ring lay on her nightstand, catching bits of moonlight through the half-open blinds. It looked beautiful and heavy at the same time, like a question she wasn't ready to answer. She reached for her phone, hesitated for a moment, then scrolled down to a familiar name, Dad. For years, she'd been the one to call on birthdays or holidays, never late, never early. But tonight wasn't about tradition. Tonight, she just needed to hear his voice. The call rang twice before it clicked. Emma. His voice was warm, a little rough from sleep. Everything all right up there in New York? She smiled softly, closing her eyes. Yeah, Dad, I just needed to talk. There was a pause on the other end. You sound different. What happened? She drew a slow breath, something I didn't see coming. He chuckled lightly. That's life, sweetheart. Always sneaking up on you. Her eyes filled with quiet tears she hadn't realized she was holding. Dad, do you remember Ethan Blake? My boss? Of course, the tech fella you've been running yourself ragged for. Emma laughed softly through the ache in her chest. Yeah, that's him. Well, what about him? She hesitated. Words felt too fragile, too impossible. He proposed to me. Silence. Just the sound of a breath on the line, long and steady. When he finally spoke, his voice was calm but curious. Proposed, as in marriage. Yeah. Her voice was barely a whisper. He said he wants to marry me. He gave me a ring and a contract. 20% of the company. Her father let out a low whistle, the kind that always came when he didn't quite know what to say. That's a lot of zeros for a girl from Vermont. Emma smiled faintly, tears sliding down her cheek. That's what I keep thinking. It feels unreal, like it's happening to someone else. He didn't rush to answer. He never did. Her father had always believed in the space between words. Finally, he said quietly, "Do you love him?" She froze. The question landed deep, cutting through the fog in her mind. I don't know. Maybe. I think so. She let out a shaky laugh. I don't even know what love's supposed to feel like anymore. Love, he said, his voice gentle and slow, isn't supposed to feel like something you can measure. It's supposed to make you honest. If you can talk to him the way you're talking to me right now without fear, without pretending, then maybe that's love. Emma pressed the phone tighter against her ear, her throat closing around his words. But what if I'm not enough for him? Dad, he's him, and I'm just me. He chuckled softly. Honey, you've been just you your whole life, and that's turned out pretty good. She laughed weakly, but the tears kept coming. Then his tone shifted, still kind, but firm in the way only a father's could be. Let me ask you something. Emma, why are you asking if you're enough? The question isn't whether you're good enough for him. He paused. The question is he good enough for you? Her breath caught. Because I've seen you work yourself to the bone for people who never said thank you. I've seen you take care of everyone else and forget to eat. You've got a heart that could fit the whole town inside it. So don't you dare think for a second that a man's worth is measured by his money or the size of his office. She didn't speak. The lump in her throat made it impossible. Her father sighed softly, the sound of wind rustling through his old farmhouse drifting in behind his voice. You grew up on dirt roads, sweetheart. You know what real things feel like. You can tell the difference between gold and glitter. So, trust that instinct. If this man loves you, truly loves you, he'll make you feel at peace, not smaller. The silence that followed was long but full, like the kind that wrapped around her on summer nights back home. She wiped her cheeks with the back of her hand, whispering, "You always know what to say." He chuckled again. That's what dads are for. For a moment, neither of them spoke. She could almost smell the faint sweetness of hay, hear the crickets outside the old farmhouse window. Home felt very far and very close at the same time. Finally, he said, "Do you want my advice?" Yes, she breathed. Don't make your decision tonight. Let it sit. Look at the ring in the daylight. If it still feels heavy, maybe it's not the right time. But if it feels like hope, then you'll know. Her voice cracked. I miss you. Dad, I miss you too. But I'm proud of you. You've built a life that's yours. Just don't forget who you built it for. She smiled through her tears. I won't. Good, he said softly. Now, get some rest. Tomorrow's another day to be brave. When the call ended, the apartment seemed quieter than before. Emma sat there for a long time, staring at the ring. The sapphire gleamed under the faint light from the street, deep and calm like the lakes back home. She stood, walked to the window, and opened it a little. The cool night air drifted in, smelling faintly of rain and spring. For the first time in days, her breathing slowed. The weight in her chest eased. Her father's words echoed in the stillness. The question isn't whether you're enough for him, it's whether he's enough for you. She looked down at the city below, lights stretching endlessly like a sea of constellations. Somewhere in that ocean of glass and steel, Ethan Blake was probably awake too, pacing, waiting, wondering. Emma closed her hand gently around the ring, and in that moment, she felt something quiet, something certain begin to form inside her. Not an answer, but the beginning of one. It felt like light, like home. The rain had stopped by morning, leaving the city washed in a thin layer of silver light. Emma stood by her window, holding the small velvet box in her hand. The sapphire inside caught the sun, glowing faintly against her palm. She hadn't slept much, too many thoughts, too many versions of what could happen next. Her father's words from the night before still echoed softly in her mind. The question isn't whether you're enough for him. It's whether he's enough for you. She breathed in slowly, then exhaled, steadying herself. There were moments in life when silence turned into a decision. This was one of them. She picked up her phone and typed, "We need to talk." Then she hit send. The message left her fingers and floated into the unknown. She placed the phone on the table, her heart beating in time with the ticking clock. Outside, a soft wind brushed against the glass. Minutes passed, then the phone buzzed. "I'll be there in 20 minutes. She felt her chest tighten. She looked around the small apartment, suddenly aware of everything: the half-read book on the couch, the mug on the counter, the stack of unopened mail. This was her world, simple, ordinary, hers. And now it was about to collide with his. She made coffee. The act itself calmed her. The familiar rhythm of it, the scoop of grounds, the sound of water pouring, the faint aroma filling the air. She didn't know what she would say, only what she needed to feel certain about when the moment came. When the knock finally came, it wasn't loud, just one quiet, deliberate sound. She turned the knob and opened the door. Ethan stood there, no suit this time, just a gray sweater and jeans. The sharp edges she always saw at the office were softer now. His eyes met hers, searching. "Emma," he said gently. She stepped aside. "Come in." He walked in slowly, his gaze moving over the room as if he were stepping into another version of her life he'd never been allowed to see. "It's cozy," he said quietly. She smiled faintly. "That's a polite way of saying small." He chuckled, then looked at her again, serious now. "You said you needed to talk." Emma nodded. Her hands trembled slightly, so she clasped them together. "Yes. I've been thinking about what you said. About everything." He waited, silent, patient. "I kept asking myself if I belonged in your world," she said. "If I was strong enough, or brave enough, or enough." She looked down at her hands. "But last night, I called my dad." Ethan tilted his head. "What did he say?" Her lips curved into a soft, wistful smile. "He told me I was asking the wrong question. He said the real one was whether you were enough for me." Ethan froze, then smiled faintly, the corners of his eyes softening. "Smart man, he is," she said. "And he's right. Because love isn't about who fits where. It's about who stays when the world shifts." She took a step closer. "And I think you would stay." Ethan's breath caught, just barely. "Emma." Before he could finish, she reached into her pocket and pulled out the ring. She looked at it for a moment, then slid it onto her finger. The sapphire caught the light again, brighter now, like it had been waiting for this moment. When she looked up, Ethan's eyes were shining. "I'm saying yes," she whispered. "Yes, to you, to this, to whatever comes next." For a heartbeat, he didn't move. And then he did. He closed the space between them in 2 quiet steps. And without a word, he wrapped his arms around her. It wasn't a grand gesture, not the kind of embrace you see in movies. It was gentle, grounding, like 2 people holding on to something fragile and real. Emma felt his heartbeat against hers, steady, sure, a rhythm she hadn't realized she'd memorized over the years. He pulled back just enough to look at her, his hands still resting at her waist. "You have no idea what this means to me." "I think I do," she said softly. He smiled, the kind of smile that reached his eyes. "You're sure?" She nodded. "I've never been more sure of anything." Ethan exhaled, as if he'd been holding his breath for years. "Then I promise whatever happens next, you'll never walk through it alone." She didn't answer. She just rested her forehead against his, eyes closed, breathing in the quiet between them. For the first time, there were no titles. No CEO, no assistant. Just Ethan and Emma, two people who had spent years orbiting the same silence, finally finding the courage to step into it together. After a while, he looked around again and smiled softly. You know, I thought I'd have to take you to some rooftop or Paris to make this official. She laughed quietly. Sorry to disappoint. It's just me and my leaky radiator. I like it, he said. It's real. She studied him for a moment, memorizing the warmth in his eyes. So, what happens now? He took her hand, his thumb brushing the ring gently. Now we start writing the next chapter. They stood there for a while, neither rushing, the city outside humming its endless tune. Somewhere, a siren echoed, a car passed, but inside that tiny apartment, time seemed to hold still. Eventually, Ethan stepped back just enough to look at her again. You know, you've completely changed the way I see things. She raised an eyebrow. Oh, how's that? I used to think success was about control, about keeping everything perfect. He smiled faintly. Now, I think maybe it's about knowing when to let go. Emma smiled. You're learning. He laughed softly. From the best teacher. The sound of his laugh filled the room like warmth spilling into the cold. Emma looked down at the sapphire once more. It no longer looked heavy. It shimmered lightly, like a piece of sky she could finally hold. Outside, the clouds began to part, letting the sun slip through. A single ray fell across the window, landing on their joined hands. For a long moment, neither spoke. There was no need to. Then Ethan whispered, almost to himself, You have no idea how long I've been waiting for this. Emma looked up, her eyes tender. Then stop waiting. He smiled, and this time, when he kissed her, it wasn't about promises or fears, it was about presence. About finally arriving in a life that had been calling them both for far too long. When they pulled apart, the city outside gleamed brighter. The ring on her finger caught the sun, scattering light across the walls. And as the warmth spread through the room, Emma thought quietly to herself, maybe love isn't something that changes you. Maybe it's something that reminds you who you already were, all along. Morning light slipped gently across the curtains, spilling soft gold over the tiny kitchen. The smell of something burnt drifted through the air. Half coffee, half eggs gone wrong. Emma stirred on the couch, blinking at the thin trail of smoke rising from the stove. She sat up, pushing her hair back, her lips curving into a sleepy smile. Please tell me, that's not what I think it is. From behind the counter, Ethan turned, holding a frying pan like it was foreign territory. His gray sweater sleeves were rolled up, and his hair was just slightly out of place, proof he'd been fighting with the skillet longer than he'd planned. I was making breakfast, he said, sheepish. At least, I tried to. Emma laughed softly. Walking over, you tried to murder breakfast. She took the pan from his hand, scraping at the dark edges. What exactly did these eggs do to you? He smiled, a rare, unguarded grin that made him look years younger. In my defense, the stove in this apartment has a personality. It's temperamental. It's 40 years old. Ethan, she teased, it's earned the right to be temperamental. He leaned against the counter, watching her with that quiet kind of affection that said more than words ever could. You know, he said after a moment, I don't think I've ever cooked for anyone before. Emma looked up, pretending to be shocked. Not even yourself. Takeout doesn't count. She shook her head, amused. Definitely not. They both laughed, the kind of laughter that made the room warmer, softer. For a while, they worked together, Ethan cracking new eggs, Emma giving gentle directions, trying not to smile too much when he concentrated too hard on something as simple as flipping a pancake. When he finally managed to do it without burning anything, she clapped quietly. There, she said, progress. He handed her a plate, proud, chef in training. They sat at the small table, shoulders almost touching. For a few moments, there was only the sound of forks against plates, the faint hum of city life outside the window. It felt easy, uncomplicated in a way that both of them hadn't felt in years. But then Ethan set his fork down. His expression shifted. Thoughtful. Serious. "Emma," he said quietly, "there's something I want to talk to you about." Her heart stilled. "What is it?" He hesitated, searching for words. "My parents are in town this weekend. I want you to meet them." The fork slipped slightly from her fingers, clinking against the plate. "Your parents?" she repeated, trying to sound calm. He nodded. "I've already told them about us." Emma looked at him, a dozen thoughts racing at once. "Ethan, are you sure that's a good idea?" He frowned gently. "Why wouldn't it be?" She stared down at her hands, tracing the edge of her napkin. "Because they come from your world. The world I don't belong to. I'm not the kind of person they expect to meet." He leaned forward, voice low and certain. "You're exactly the kind of person I want them to meet." But she didn't smile. Her mind was already painting pictures she didn't want to see, rooms filled with polished furniture, conversation laced with unspoken judgment, eyes that would study her like she was a misplaced detail in a perfect frame. Ethan reached across the table, touching her hand lightly. "Hey," he said, "look at me." She did. "I know what you're thinking. And you're wrong." Her eyes softened, but her voice was small. "They'll see me and think I'm after your money." He squeezed her hand gently. "Then I'll tell them that you've had a key to my office, my passwords, and my trust for 4 years, and you never once took advantage of it." Emma's throat tightened. "That's not how people like them think." "Ethan." He exhaled, brushing a hand through his hair. "Maybe not, but it's time they see who I really am, and who I'm choosing." The words hung between them. For Ethan, they carried pride, certainty. For Emma, they carried weight. She glanced toward the window, watching the city come to life below the taxis, the morning crowd, the noise she used to find comforting. But now it all felt distant. Her voice came out soft. "Boston." "Right. That's where they live." He nodded. "Yes. We can drive down tomorrow. It's just a few hours." A few hours. That's what he said. But to Emma, it sounded like a crossing, a line between two worlds. Ethan must have seen the hesitation in her eyes, because he smiled gently. "You don't have to be anyone but yourself." "Emma?" That's who I fell in love with. She wanted to believe that. God, she wanted to. But love wasn't always enough to soften old expectations, especially the kind written into family legacies and last names that carried weight like currency. Still, she met his gaze and managed a small nod. "All right, I'll go." His eyes lit up. "You will." She nodded again, slower this time. "Yes, but only if you promise one thing. Anything. Don't try to protect me from who they are. Let me see it. Let me decide how to stand in it." Ethan hesitated for a beat, then smiled. Deal. They sat there for a while longer, both quiet in their own thoughts. The smell of coffee had faded, the breakfast half eaten, the sunlight climbing higher. Emma's mind wandered to her suitcase, to the dress she'd wear, to the look on the faces of people who'd grown up in a world where wealth was tradition and love was strategy. She wondered if they'd ever understand someone like her, a woman who still wrote thank you notes by hand, who carried Vermont dust on her shoes no matter how long she lived in the city. Ethan rose, walked behind her, and wrapped his arms gently around her shoulders. "You're shaking," he whispered. She leaned into him slightly, letting the warmth of his presence steady her. "I'm not used to people looking at me and seeing something to judge." He pressed a soft kiss to her temple. "Then, they'll have to learn to see what I see." Emma closed her eyes, the sound of his voice anchoring her for a moment. She didn't know what Boston would bring: approval, rejection, or something in between. But she knew one thing: whatever waited there, she couldn't face it with fear. When she opened her eyes again, the city outside gleamed brighter, the day fully awake. The smell of burnt eggs still lingered faintly in the air, but somehow, even that felt comforting now. Ethan's hand found hers, fingers intertwining. Tomorrow, he said softly. Emma nodded, a slow smile breaking through. Tomorrow. And as he kissed the top of her head, she thought maybe love wasn't just about finding a person. Maybe it was about daring to step into their world, even when yours felt so far away. Outside, a soft wind brushed through the trees, carrying the promise of morning and the quiet tremor of what waited ahead. The long, winding road to the Blake estate curved through fields of winter grass and ancient oaks, their branches bowing toward the cold sky. Emma sat quietly in the passenger seat, hands clasped in her lap, watching the world blur past. The car's engine hummed low, steady, like Ethan's breathing beside her. He looked calm, too calm, in a way that made her wonder if it was practiced. The kind of calm you wear like armor when facing something you can't control. She had seen pictures of his family's home before, in magazines that called it a New England treasure, but nothing could have prepared her for the real thing. The Blake estate rose from the hillside like a memory carved in stone. Columns framed the front porch, tall and pale against the gray sky. Ivy crawled up the sides of the mansion, clinging stubbornly to its grandeur. As the car rolled to a stop on the gravel drive, Emma's heart began to race. The windows glinted with light. Somewhere inside, people with perfect posture and colder smiles were waiting. Ethan glanced at her and smiled, his hand reaching over to rest on hers. "Hey," he said softly, "just breathe. They're going to love you." She forced a smile. "You're a terrible liar." He laughed quietly. "Maybe, but I'm still right." When the front door opened, a woman stepped out first, elegant, poised, and dressed in gray silk that matched the color of the sky. Margaret Blake, Ethan's mother. Her hair was swept up perfectly, her pearls glowing faintly against her throat. She looked like someone who had never once hurried in her life. "Ethan," she said, her voice smooth as glass. She kissed her son's cheek lightly, then turned her gaze to Emma. "And you must be Miss Carter." Her tone wasn't cruel, but it wasn't warm either. Polite, cautious, the kind of voice that could hold kindness or contempt, depending on how the next few seconds unfolded. Emma smiled gently, extending her hand. "It's lovely to meet you, Mrs. Blake." Margaret hesitated just long enough for Emma to notice, then shook her hand delicately, as if the gesture itself required restraint. "Welcome to our home." From the doorway, another presence appeared, broader, firmer. Richard Blake, Ethan's father. His expression carried the kind of confidence that came from generations of power, the certainty of someone used to being obeyed. "So, this is the young lady we've heard about," he said, voice low and assessing. Emma nodded. "Yes, sir." He looked at Ethan. "You've surprised us." Ethan smiled slightly. "I tend to do that." Richard's eyes moved back to Emma, scanning her in a way that made her wish she'd worn something else. Stood differently, breathed less loudly. "A secretary, wasn't it?" he said casually, turning the words over like something foreign on his tongue. Ethan's smile didn't waver, but his jaw tightened. "Assistant and partner now." Margaret's eyebrow lifted. "Partner. In every sense of the word," he said evenly. A small silence followed, thin, sharp, and fragile. Emma could almost hear the weight of it settle in the room. They were led into a sitting room filled with antiques and quiet judgment. The air smelled faintly of lemon polish and history. Margaret poured tea with the precision of a ritual, her movements graceful, detached. Richard leaned back in his chair, studying Emma as though she were a contract clause he wasn't sure he approved. "So," he began, "you've known our son for some time." "Yes, sir, a little over 4 years. And in that time, he decided you're the one." Emma hesitated, feeling the warmth rise to her cheeks. It wasn't something either of us expected. But, yes. Margaret's tone was mild. "It's quite unorthodox." Ethan reached for Emma's hand under the table, squeezing gently. "Mother?" Margaret's gaze softened slightly but didn't change direction. "You must understand, dear, this family has expectations, responsibilities. The Blake name carries a certain weight. Emma nodded, keeping her voice calm. I understand that, Mrs. Blake, but I also know that names don't build legacies, people do. Richard's eyes narrowed slightly. And what would you know about legacy, Miss Carter? Her chest tightened, but she met his gaze. Maybe not the kind you mean. My father's a farmer. He doesn't have a company or a title, but he's built something that lasts: respect, kindness. That's a legacy too. For a moment, the room went still. Even Margaret's teacup paused mid-air. Ethan's lips curved into a faint, proud smile. That's why she's here. Richard leaned back again, considering her. There was no approval in his expression, but there was something like acknowledgement, a small shift, almost invisible. Margaret spoke again, quieter now. Ethan, may I have a word with you privately? He looked reluctant, but nodded. Of course. He turned to Emma. I'll just be a minute. When he and his mother stepped out, Emma was left alone with Richard. The air in the room seemed to grow heavier. He folded his hands, his voice calm but pointed. You seem like a good person, Miss Carter, honest. But you must realize, this arrangement is not practical. Emma looked at him steadily. You think I'm not right for him? I think my son has built an empire that requires focus, discipline, stability. You come from a different world. It's not an insult. It's a fact. She swallowed, feeling her heart pound. Maybe, but sometimes the world needs a little balance. Maybe that's what he found in me. Richard's eyes stayed on her for a long moment. Then he sighed softly. You remind me of his mother when she was younger. She fought the same way, quietly, but relentlessly. The words caught her off guard. Before she could answer, the door opened again. Ethan returned, his expression unreadable. Margaret followed, her face calm but thoughtful. Dinner is ready, she said. The meal passed with careful conversation. Questions about her background, her work, her education. Emma answered them all with quiet honesty, though she could feel the invisible thread of judgment woven through every word. Ethan stayed close, guiding her through it with subtle glances, small touches, silent reassurance. When it was time to leave, Margaret walked them to the door. The night air was cool, the sky painted with thin clouds. Miss Carter, Margaret said, her tone softer now. I hope you understand our surprise. Ethan has never shared much of himself before. It's simply an adjustment. Emma smiled gently. I understand, Mrs. Blake. Margaret's eyes lingered on her for a moment, something like curiosity flickering there. Then she nodded once. Safe travels. In the car? Silence filled the space between them as the mansion disappeared behind the trees. Ethan reached for her hand, his voice low. I'm sorry if they made you uncomfortable. She turned to him, her thumb brushing his knuckles. I wasn't expecting comfort. He glanced at her, and there was pride in his smile. You handled them better than I ever did. Emma looked back out the window, the lights of the estate fading into darkness. Somewhere deep inside, the fear still stirred, but beneath it, something steadier had begun to grow. She had faced their world, and though she didn't belong to it, she hadn't let it swallow her. As the car drove on through the quiet Massachusetts night, she looked down at the sapphire on her finger. Its glow was faint but certain, and for the first time, she felt that maybe she could hold her own in any room. The conference room at Blake Innovations gleamed under the soft white light of the ceiling fixtures. Walls of glass reflected the skyline, Boston stretching out like a promise beyond the windows. The air smelled faintly of coffee and anticipation. Emma stood just outside the door, smoothing the front of her blazer, her palms slightly damp. Inside, she could hear voices, deep, confident, measured, the sound of power, cloaked in civility. Ethan's bored. He turned toward her, adjusting his tie. His expression was calm, but his eyes carried something tender, something meant only for her. You ready? He asked softly. She nodded, even though part of her wasn't, as I'll ever be. He smiled faintly. That's all I need. When they entered, the room fell silent. 12 board members sat around the long oak table, men and women who had built their fortunes alongside the company's rise. They looked at Ethan, then at her. Some smiled politely, others didn't bother. Ethan took his seat at the head of the table. Emma sat beside him, her back straight, her heart steadying to the rhythm of the clock on the far wall. Thank you all for coming, Ethan began. His voice carried the quiet authority that had once built the company from a dorm room idea to a billion-dollar empire. Before we move to quarterly reports, there's something personal I want to address. A murmur ran through the room. The CFO, a sharp-eyed man named Carter Reeves, folded his hands. Personal Ethan's tone remained even. Yes, personal and professional. He glanced at Emma, then back to the board. As some of you may have heard, I've asked Emma Carter to marry me. The words seemed to hang in the air, too soft and too heavy at the same time. Several faces stiffened. One woman's pen froze mid-note. A few exchanged quick, unreadable glances. Ethan continued, unshaken. She has been my executive assistant for 4 years. She knows this company, our vision, our struggles better than anyone in this room. And I've made a decision, effective immediately. Emma will hold 20% of Blake Innovations as a partner. The murmurs turned to whispers. Carter Reeves leaned forward, his tone polite but pointed. Ethan, forgive me, but that's a substantial share to allocate to, he hesitated, personal relationship. Ethan met his gaze without blinking. It's not a gift, it's recognition. Someone else spoke up, an older man at the far end of the table. Recognition for what? Exactly. Ethan turned slightly, gesturing toward Emma. Why don't you let her answer that? Emma froze for a heartbeat. Then she inhaled quietly, rose from her seat, and looked around the room. 12 pairs of eyes, sharp and assessing, waited. She clasped her hands to keep them from shaking. Good morning, she began, her voice steady but soft. I know some of you are wondering why I'm here, and I don't blame you. A small, nervous smile flickered across her lips. 4 years ago, when Ethan hired me, I wasn't a strategist or an investor. I was just a woman who took notes, scheduled meetings, and made sure the details no one noticed never got lost. But I've watched this company grow. I've seen its people give everything they have to make it succeed. She paused, glancing briefly at Ethan, who gave a slow nod. When the market shifted last year, she continued, I was the one who proposed the restructuring that saved the company $14 million in operating costs. When our software launch stalled, I found the consultant who fixed the glitch before it became a PR disaster. None of that was part of my job. I did it because I care about this company, about the people who make it what it is. Her voice softened, but her eyes didn't waver. So, yes, I may have started as Ethan's assistant, but I've earned my place here, not because of who I'm marrying, but because of what I've built with all of you. The room went still. A few members shifted, uncomfortable but thoughtful. The woman with the pen resumed writing. Carter Reeves sat back, his brow furrowed. Ethan smiled quietly, pride flickering behind his calm. Emma took a small breath, her voice gentler now. I don't expect everyone to trust me right away. Trust is built through time and work. But if you give me the chance, I'll prove that I'm not here to take anything away. I'm here to make us stronger. The silence lingered for a few beats, then broke with the sound of a chair creaking. The oldest board member, a woman named Clara Hastings, leaned forward. You handled yourself well, Miss Carter. Better than most of us did on our first day. Emma smiled faintly. Thank you. Clara looked around the table. I say we vote. Ethan's made his position clear. The rest of us should do the same. Ethan nodded. All in favor of confirming Emma Carter as equity partner, hands began to rise. 1, 2, then more. 8 hands in total. Then 2 more hesitated and lifted. 10 in favor, two against. It was done. Ethan glanced at Emma. "Congratulations," he said quietly, his voice carrying a warmth that only she could hear. The meeting continued, but the air had shifted. Some faces were polite, others guarded, but something had changed. She had spoken, and they had listened. When the room finally emptied, Ethan closed his laptop and looked at her. "You were incredible," he said softly. She exhaled, her shoulders relaxing for the first time all morning. "I was terrified." He smiled. "That's usually a good sign. You're doing something brave." She laughed quietly. "You think I know?" He stood, offering his hand. "Let's get out of here. You deserve air, maybe coffee, or a medal." She took his hand, letting his fingers wrap around hers. "Coffee sounds safer." They walked out together, passing through the long hallway lined with portraits of men in suits, past and present leaders of Blake Innovations. Emma glanced at them briefly. All those faces, all those legacies. For the first time, she didn't feel like an outsider walking past them. She felt like she was stepping into her own frame. At the elevator, Ethan turned to her. "I hope you realize," he said softly, "what you did today wasn't just about the company." She tilted her head. "What was it about?" Then he smiled. "It was about you becoming who you've always been. The rest of the world's just catching up." As the elevator doors closed, she looked at her reflection in the mirrored wall, the sapphire ring glinting softly against her skin. And in her eyes, there was no longer hesitation, only quiet certainty. Outside, the city waited loud, alive, unbothered by boardrooms or votes. But somewhere high above it all, a woman who once fetched coffee for meetings had just changed the tone of one. And, as the elevator descended, Emma Carter allowed herself one small, private thought. They may not all be happy about it, but they'll remember it. It started with one photo. A single image of her and Ethan walking out of the boardroom, hand in hand, his expression calm, hers uncertain but smiling. Someone from the press had caught it from across the street. By the next morning, it was everywhere. From assistant to fiancé, the Blake fairy tale. One headline said, "Office romance or corporate climb?" asked another. And the worst one, the one that made Emma's stomach twist, simply read, "Cinderella in heels. The secretary who won the CEO." She stared at her phone, scrolling through the endless stream of comments. Thousands of strangers dissecting her life, as if it were a movie they had bought tickets to criticize. Some called her lucky, some called her clever. Others didn't bother hiding their cruelty. She must be after his money. She's just another office girl with good timing. She played the long game smart move. Each line felt like a pinprick against her skin. The world didn't see the long nights, the endless spreadsheets, the quiet moments of belief she'd carried when no one else noticed her. They didn't see the girl who once biked 6 miles every day in Vermont, just to make it to her part-time job on time. They only saw the sapphire ring on her hand. She turned her phone face down on the kitchen counter and pressed her palms over her eyes. The apartment was silent except for the low hum of the refrigerator. It used to feel peaceful. Now, it felt like hiding. A soft knock came at the door. Emma. She opened it to find Lily standing there, a familiar warmth wrapped in a long coat and a messy bun. She was holding a paper bag that smelled like coffee and cinnamon. "I brought survival fuel," Lily said, stepping in. "And before you ask..." "No, I didn't read the comments." Emma let out a weak laugh. "That makes one of us." They sat on the couch, the paper cups warming their hands. For a while, neither spoke. The city outside buzzed faintly horns, sirens, life carrying on, uncaring. Lily glanced at her. "Rough day." Emma nodded. "Rough few days." "I saw the headlines," Lily said gently. "They don't deserve your attention." "You know." "I know," Emma whispered, "but it's hard not to look." It's like watching people draw a version of you that you don't even recognize. Lily's eyes softened. "That's because they don't know you. They only know a story that sells." Emma looked down, her voice trembling slightly. "I thought I was ready for this. For his world. But I don't think I am. I can handle his parents, the meetings, even the boardroom. But this," she gestured toward her phone, "this feels like standing in a storm naked." Lily leaned closer, her tone quiet but steady. "Emma, they can write whatever they want. They can twist it however they need to. But the truth is something only you carry. You and him." Emma blinked back tears. "You make it sound simple." "It's not simple," Lily said softly. "It's just real. You don't have to convince the world. You just have to keep showing up for yourself, for him, for the life you're building. Let the noise fade." For a long moment, neither spoke. The words hung in the small space between them, sinking slowly into the quiet. Emma sighed, rubbing her temples. "You know what's ironic? I used to dream of being seen, not invisible, not just the girl behind someone else's success. And now that people see me, I hate it." Lily smiled sadly. "Being seen isn't always the same as being understood." Emma looked at her, eyes wet but calm. "Do you ever think it's all too much? That some people aren't built for this kind of attention?" Lily shrugged lightly. "Maybe. But you're not just some people. You're someone who listens more than she speaks, who makes everyone around her better without needing credit. The world will always misunderstand that kind of strength." Emma's lips curved into the smallest smile. "You sound like my dad. Then he's a smart man." They both laughed softly, the sound carrying a fragile kind of relief. After a while, Emma stood and walked toward the window. The city lights shimmered like broken glass across the river. Somewhere out there, Ethan was likely in a meeting or handling the same headlines from his end. She wondered what he was feeling if he, too, carried that quiet ache beneath all his certainty. Her reflection in the glass looked different now. Older, maybe, not in years, but in the weight of what she was learning, that love and courage sometimes had to share the same space as fear. Behind her, Lily spoke again. "You know, Em, people are going to keep talking. They'll build you up one day, tear you down the next. That's what they do. But the thing that will outlast all of that—" Emma turned slightly. "What your heart. That's what people will remember, even the ones who pretend not to." Emma nodded slowly, letting the words settle. Outside, the night deepened. The noise of the city softened into something distant and low. She felt a strange calm creeping in. Fragile but real. Maybe this was what resilience felt like, not loud or defiant, but steady, like a candle that refused to go out, no matter how strong the wind. Lily stood, wrapping her scarf tighter. "You're going to be fine. Em, you always are." Emma smiled faintly. "I'm not sure I believe that yet." "That's okay," Lily said, walking toward the door. "I'll believe it for you until you do." After she left, Emma stayed by the window. She picked up her phone again, scrolling once more, not to read, but to look. Somewhere among the noise was a photo of her and Ethan at the board meeting. He was looking at her the way he always did, steady, proud, a little in awe. She zoomed in just enough to see the way his hand rested near hers, the smallest gesture of connection. It reminded her of who they were outside the headlines. She locked the phone, placed it face down again, and whispered to the empty room. "They don't know me." The clock ticked softly in reply. Emma took a deep breath, closing her eyes. The ache hadn't gone away, but it had shifted less sharp now, more bearable. Somewhere beyond the noise, she still knew who she was, and for tonight, that was enough. The ballroom shimmered with golden light, every chandelier dripping crystal like frozen rain. The sound of violins floated through the air, mingling with the low hum of conversation and the clinking of champagne glasses. Emma stood near the edge of the crowd, her hands clasped lightly in front of her, her pulse fluttering beneath the soft fabric of her dress. The gown had been Ethan's idea, a deep navy satin that caught the light when she moved. Simple, elegant, understated. She'd resisted at first, insisting she didn't need something new. But he'd only smiled and said, "It's not about what you wear. It's about how you walk into a room, now, standing among New York's most polished elite." She understood what he meant. Every movement mattered here. Every glance carried meaning. Every smile hid a question. She felt Ethan beside her, calm as ever, the picture of control in his tailored black suit. When he leaned slightly toward her, his voice brushed her ear. "You're doing great." She smiled faintly. "I haven't done anything yet." "That's the point," he said, his tone low and warm. "You don't have to." But as they moved through the room, shaking hands, exchanging greetings, she could feel the weight of eyes following them. Whispers lingered like perfume in their wake. "That's her. The secretary looks more poised than I expected." She kept her posture straight, her expression calm, though inside, her stomach twisted. She told herself it didn't matter. She was here for him, for the cause this gala supported, for the image he needed to maintain, for the quiet promise they were building together. But some words, even when whispered, had a way of sinking in. Halfway through the evening, while Ethan spoke with the event director, Emma wandered toward the refreshment table for a moment of air. She reached for a glass of water and froze. Vanessa Cole stood there. She was as striking as Emma remembered from the photo's sleek blonde hair. Perfect posture, diamonds that looked like they had stories of their own. A well-known philanthropist, tech investor, and, once upon a time, Ethan's first serious love. "Emma Carter," Vanessa said smoothly, her voice honeyed with amusement. "So, we finally meet." Emma turned, polite but cautious. "Vanessa, it's nice to meet you too." Vanessa smiled the kind of smile that was beautiful from a distance, sharp up close. "I must say, you've made quite an impression on the city. The papers adore you. The Cinderella of Silicon Valley." Emma's throat tightened, but she kept her tone even. "I don't read much of what they write." "Smart," Vanessa said, tilting her glass. "Though it must be fascinating, going from typing schedules to attending galas." Emma met her gaze quietly. "I suppose everyone transitions differently." The smile on Vanessa's lips faltered for a heartbeat, just enough for Emma to see the truth beneath it. But before either could say more, Ethan appeared beside them. His hand found Emma's waist with the ease of someone who no longer needed permission. "Vanessa?" He greeted, his tone cordial but distant. "It's been a while. Too long," she said, her eyes flicking to his hand on Emma. "I was just congratulating your fiancé on her inspiring journey." Ethan's smile didn't reach his eyes. "I'm sure you were." Vanessa took a slow sip of champagne, then said lightly, "You've always had a soft spot for potential. I suppose it's admirable that you found it so close to home." The comment hung in the air, brittle as glass. Ethan's voice was calm, but the edge in it was unmistakable. "You're right about one thing, Vanessa. I did find something remarkable close to home. Someone who reminds me why this all matters." He turned slightly, his gaze softening as it landed on Emma. Then he lifted his glass, addressing not just her, but the circle of onlookers who had quietly gathered nearby. "This," he said, his voice steady and resonant, "is the woman who taught me that love isn't about power or legacy. It's about respect. It's about standing beside someone who makes you want to be better, not for the world, but for yourself." The crowd went quiet. Even the music seemed to pause for a beat. Emma felt her cheeks flush, her heart pounding as Ethan raised his glass higher. "To Emma Carter, the woman who reminds me of what's real." Applause rippled through the room, polite at first, then genuine. Vanessa's expression didn't change, but her eyes did just slightly, like a candle flickering in the wind. Emma could only stand there, caught between disbelief and awe. She looked at Ethan, who was watching her with the same quiet certainty that had carried her through every difficult moment since that first day he said her name differently. When the toast ended, Vanessa smiled again, colder now. "You've certainly learned how to make a statement." "Ethan," he smiled back, "I had a good teacher, and just like that, She was gone, disappearing into the swirl of laughter and champagne, as if she'd never been there at all. Emma exhaled slowly, realizing only then that she'd been holding her breath. Ethan turned to her. "You okay?" She nodded, though her voice came out quieter than she meant. "That was unexpected." He smiled faintly. "You mean her or me both?" He reached for her hand again, his thumb brushing over her skin. "You don't ever have to prove yourself to people like that." Emma looked at him, the glow from the chandeliers reflecting in his eyes. "Maybe not, but sometimes silence isn't enough." He studied her for a moment, then nodded. "You're right. But tonight, I think silence said everything it needed to." They stood there together, the noise of the gala rising again around them, music, laughter, the sound of crystal striking crystal. Emma let herself lean slightly into him, her body finally relaxing. For a few seconds, she forgot about the articles, the whispers, the judgments. In that moment, there was only the warmth of his hand, the steady rhythm of his breathing, and the soft hum of a future beginning to take shape. Later that night, when the crowd thinned and the music softened to a distant murmur, Emma stepped out onto the balcony for air. The city stretched out before her, glittering and endless. Ethan followed quietly, wrapping his jacket over her shoulders. "Cold. Just thinking," she said softly. "About what?" She smiled faintly. "How strange it feels to be seen, not just by the world, but by you." He slipped his arms around her from behind, resting his chin near her temple. "Then remember this. The world might see a story, but I see you." Her eyes closed, the city lights reflecting like constellations across the glass. In the distance, laughter echoed faintly from the ballroom, but it felt far away, like another world. And as the night deepened around them, Emma realized something simple, something true sometimes. Love isn't about being defended. It's about being believed in, even when the world refuses to understand. The weeks after the gala blurred into long days and longer nights. Emma barely noticed when winter slipped quietly into spring. The city's rhythm moved fast, and she was keeping up emails, presentations, contracts, numbers. Her days began before sunrise and ended long after midnight. The glow of her laptop, the last light she saw before sleep. At first, the work felt like proof. Proof that she belonged, that she wasn't just the woman who caught the billionaire's heart, but the woman who could stand beside him and hold her ground. But somewhere between the board meetings and endless deadlines, something shifted. Her hands trembled more often. Her reflection in the mirror looked paler, her eyes ringed with exhaustion. The joy that once lived quietly between her and Ethan had thinned into something distant, an echo stretched too far. Ethan noticed. He always did. But lately, when he tried to slow her down, she brushed him off with a tired smile. "I'm fine," she'd say, her voice soft but firm. "I just need to finish this report, or send this file, or fix this mistake." He would stand there, watching her fingers move across the keyboard, his jaw tight. "Emma," he'd say gently, "the company isn't going to fall apart if you take a night off." She would look up at him, her expression calm, almost tender. "You don't understand. Ethan, they're waiting for me to fail. I can't give them that satisfaction." And he'd go quiet, because deep down, he did understand. He'd spent his entire life fighting for a place that no one believed he deserved either. But this, watching her carry a burden that was meant for both of them, it hurt. One night, he found her asleep at the dining table, her head resting on her arm, her laptop still open. The cursor blinked patiently beside an unfinished sentence. He stood there for a moment, just looking at her. The woman who had once made the whole world seem simpler was now lost in a storm she didn't need to weather alone. He reached down, brushing a strand of hair from her cheek. She stirred, but didn't wake. That's when he decided. The next morning, he drove her out of the city without telling her where they were going. The skyline faded behind them, replaced by quieter streets, older buildings, rows of trees still bare from winter. Emma leaned against the window, her voice drowsy. Where are we going? You'll see, he said, his tone light. After half an hour, he pulled the car to a stop in front of a narrow, brick house on a quiet street in Charlestown. The house looked like it had been standing there forever, its windows framed by white shutters. Ivy climbing gently up one side. The porch light flickered faintly, even in daylight. Emma frowned softly. What is this place? Ethan smiled, stepping out of the car. Come find out. She followed him up the short path. The wooden steps creaked beneath their feet. When he opened the door, the scent of cedar and dust filled the air. Inside, sunlight poured through tall windows, cutting across a wooden floor worn smooth by time. The rooms were empty, quiet except for the soft echo of their footsteps. Emma turned slowly, her eyes tracing the walls, the old fireplace, the ceiling beams. It's beautiful, she whispered. He watched her, hands in his pockets. It needs some work. The wiring's old. The paint's faded. But, he paused, then looked at her with that quiet seriousness she'd come to know. It feels like something that could last. She turned toward him, her voice barely above a whisper. Why are we here? He stepped closer, his tone soft but sure. Because I think we've both forgotten what we were building. This isn't about meetings or headlines. It's about this finding something that feels real, something that belongs to us, not to the world watching. She swallowed, her chest tightening. Ethan. He reached into his jacket and pulled out a small set of keys, placing them gently in her hand. It's not a penthouse, not a mansion, just a house with good bones and bad lighting. His smile curved faintly. But I thought maybe it could be ours. For a moment. Emma couldn't speak. The keys felt heavy and light all at once in her palm. She looked around the empty space, the sunlight pooling on the floor, the faint hum of quiet, the promise lingering in the air. Something inside her broke not from sadness, but from the slow, unbearable tenderness of being seen. She stepped forward, her voice trembling. Ethan, I don't need a house. I know, he said softly, but maybe we both need a home. The silence that followed wasn't empty. It was full of everything they hadn't said, everything they'd been too busy to feel. She dropped the keys to the floor and wrapped her arms around him, her head against his chest. Yes, she whispered, her words breaking against a breath. For us, just for us. He held her close, his hand resting against the back of her neck. The world outside felt miles away. No press, no deadlines, no expectations. Just the sound of their hearts settling back into rhythm. After a while, she pulled back and looked up at him, her cheeks still damp. You found this place. I drove past it once, he said. Before I ever met you, I thought then that someone could make it beautiful again. He smiled faintly. I guess I was waiting for the right person. Emma laughed softly through her tears. You're impossible. He kissed her forehead gently. So are you. They walked through the house together room by room, imagining what could be. The front room would hold a piano, she decided. The kitchen would have open shelves and a window above the sink that looked out onto the small backyard. Upstairs, there'd be a tiny office for her writing, a room filled with light. By the time they reached the back porch, the sun was low, turning the sky a soft rose gold. Emma leaned against the railing, breathing in the quiet. It feels like peace, she said. Ethan joined her, his hand brushing hers. That's the point. She turned to look at him, her eyes warm and tired but alive again. You know, I spent weeks trying to prove I belonged in your world. And all this time, I think what I really wanted was a world that felt like mine too. He smiled, his gaze soft. Then let's build it together. The wind picked up slightly, carrying the faint scent of rain in spring. Emma closed her eyes for a moment, feeling it move through her hair. For the first time in months, she didn't think about what people were saying, or how hard she had to work to be enough. She just felt present, grounded, whole. When she opened her eyes again, Ethan was watching her. The fading sunlight caught the edge of his smile. She reached for his hand, her voice barely above a whisper. "For us," she said again. He nodded. "For us." And as the last light of day slipped across the old wooden floors, the house seemed to breathe quietly, gently, as if welcoming the beginning of something that might finally last. The air inside the Blake estate felt softer that evening. The heavy quiet that used to hang between Margaret Blake and Emma had been replaced by something else still cautious, but warmer, like the first touch of sunlight after a long storm. Emma sat with Margaret in the drawing room, where the fire flickered gently and the scent of old roses lingered in the air. The older woman had asked her to stay after dinner, saying there was something she wanted to do. Margaret's movements were slow but deliberate as she reached for a small velvet box resting on the table beside her. "This belonged to my mother-in-law," she said, her voice carrying the weight of time. "She wore it every day for 50 years. And when she passed, she left it for the woman who would one day carry the Blake name with grace." Emma's breath caught as Margaret opened the box. Inside, nestled against the dark velvet, was a ring, an old sapphire set in a delicate gold band. The stone wasn't perfect. A faint scratch ran through the surface, as if time itself had left its mark. Margaret looked up, her eyes steady. "I didn't give it to anyone before, not because I didn't want to, but because I wasn't sure. Until now." Emma's voice trembled. "Mrs. Blake, Margaret," the older woman interrupted softly. "If you're going to be part of this family, you'll call me Margaret." Emma blinked, the room suddenly blurring. "I don't know what to say." "Just say yes," Margaret said, slipping the ring into her palm. "And promise me one thing: don't lose yourself in this world. It can be cruel, but I've watched you. Emma, you have something none of us learned from privilege." Emma smiled through the tears that had begun to form. "What's that heart?" Margaret said simply. The words settled into the quiet between them, warm and heavy, like truth always is. For a few seconds, everything felt still. The fire crackled. The clock ticked softly. Emma closed her fingers around the ring, feeling its history press against her skin. She didn't know why, but it felt like the beginning of something fragile and important. Later that night, as she and Ethan drove back to the city, Emma turned the ring over in her hand, watching it catch the passing streetlights. "She gave it to me," she said quietly. Ethan glanced at her, his expression softening. "She did." Emma nodded. "She said it was for the woman who carried the Blake name with grace." She looked at him, her voice quiet. "I'm not sure I deserve that yet." He reached over, his fingers brushing hers. "You do. More than anyone ever has." But even as his words settled in the air, the car's dashboard lit up with the buzz of his phone. A notification, then another, then 3 more. Ethan frowned, pulling the car to the side of the road. Emma watched as he read the screen, his jaw tightening, his expression shifting from calm to something sharp and focused. "What is it?" she asked. He didn't answer right away. The glow from the phone cast a pale light across his face. Finally, he looked at her. "Cole Enterprises just made a move." Her heart skipped. "Vanessa?" He nodded, exhaling slowly. "They're buying up our smaller shareholders. Hostile takeover tactics. It's starting." The words hit like cold water. "Can they do that?" "If they get enough votes," he said, his voice low. "They can try to force me out." Emma sat back, the hum of passing cars filling the silence. She could see the tension in his shoulders, the weight that came with a lifetime of building something now under attack. After a long pause, she asked quietly, "Do you think she's doing this because of us?" Ethan's hands tightened on the steering wheel. "Maybe partly, but mostly because she's ambitious. This is her way of winning back what she thinks she lost." The city skyline appeared in the distance, lights glittering like sharp stars. Emma stared at them, her chest tightening. "So, what happens now?" He looked at her, the softness from earlier gone, replaced by the calm focus she'd seen in boardrooms and crises. "Now, we fight." But that night, sleep didn't come easily. While Ethan made calls in the next room, speaking in low tones to lawyers and board members, Emma lay awake, staring at the ceiling. The sapphire ring Margaret had given her sat on the nightstand, catching the faint glow of the streetlight outside. It felt like a symbol of belonging just hours ago. Now it felt like a reminder of what she stood to lose. She thought of Ethan, his certainty, his strength, the way he'd always protected what he loved. And for the first time, she wondered what protection would cost this time. When he finally came to bed, his voice was softer, but his eyes were distant. "We'll handle it, I promise." She turned toward him, searching his face. "And if we can't?" He hesitated for a moment, then whispered, "Then we find another way." The next morning, the headlines hit. Cole Enterprises launches takeover bid for Blake Innovations. The financial channels ran footage of Ethan walking into the company headquarters, the words corporate war flashing beneath his name. Emma watched from home, her hands clasped around a mug of coffee gone cold. She wanted to go with him, to stand beside him the way she always had. But he'd asked her to stay out of it this time. "It's too messy," he'd said. "You've already been through enough." The day dragged on, every hour stretching longer than the last. Calls came in, messages from journalists, whispers from employees. Each one carried the same question: is Blake Innovations falling apart? When Ethan returned late that evening, he looked like a man who'd been fighting shadows all day. His tie was loose, his voice rough. "They're trying to buy the board. Vanessa's pulling every string she can." Emma stepped toward him, her hand brushing his arm. "We'll figure it out." He looked at her then. Really looked like he was seeing not just her, but the life they were both trying to hold together. "I hope so," he said softly. "Because this time, it's not just business." She nodded, feeling the truth of that settle deep inside her. It wasn't just about the company anymore. It was about legacy, pride, and love tangled in the middle of it all. As the night deepened, Ethan fell asleep beside her, exhaustion pulling him under. Emma stayed awake, staring at the sapphire ring now back on her finger. The faint scratch across the stone caught the dim light imperfect, but enduring. Maybe that's what they were now. Imperfect, but still holding on. Outside, the city moved restlessly beneath the dark. Somewhere out there, Vanessa Cole was making her next move, and Emma knew this storm was just beginning. Rain fell that night, steady and soft, the kind that blurred the edges of everything. Inside the Charlestown house, the light from a single lamp spilled across the wooden floor, catching the faint glint of the sapphire ring on Emma's finger. The house smelled faintly of cedar and coffee, though neither had been touched in hours. Ethan stood by the window, his hands deep in his pockets, his shoulders heavy with silence. He hadn't spoken much since returning from the board meeting. He didn't need to. Emma could feel the storm in him, the quiet kind, the kind that didn't break with thunder, but with surrender. When he finally turned toward her, his face looked older, drawn by a kind of exhaustion that had nothing to do with sleep. "They've made an offer," he said. She nodded slowly. "Vanessa?" He hesitated, then gave a short nod. "She's willing to withdraw the takeover, but under certain terms." Emma didn't ask. She already knew. Her chest tightened as he took a breath, his words careful, deliberate. "The board thinks the best path forward is to delay the wedding. Or," his voice faltered, "to merge, temporarily, with Cole Enterprises. He stopped himself, unable to finish. "Through a marriage," she whispered. Ethan closed his eyes, the single word cutting through him. "It's not what I want. It's not even business. It's manipulation. But if I refuse, we lose everything. Thousands of jobs, families, years of work." Emma sat very still. The rain pressed harder against the windows, its rhythm steady, cruelly calm. "And if you agree?" He opened his eyes. The look in them broke her. "Then the company survives. Everyone does." For a long moment, neither spoke. The clock on the wall ticked like a heartbeat between them. Emma rose slowly, walked toward him, and stopped just close enough to feel the heat of his body, the ache of the space between them. "You've always fought for what you built," she said softly. "It's who you are." "And you're what I built that matters most," he answered, his voice low, rough. "I'm not giving that up." Her hands trembled as she reached for his, holding them tightly. "Ethan, listen to me. This isn't just about you or me anymore." He shook his head. "Don't say that." But she did, her words steady even as her eyes filled. "It's about the people who believe in you, the ones who've worked years for your dream. You can't let them lose everything because of love. Because of love." He almost laughed, but it wasn't joy. "Emma, love is the only thing keeping me standing right now." Her throat closed. "And maybe," she whispered, "that's exactly why you need to let me go." He stared at her, disbelief flashing into pain. "No?" She tried to smile, but it wavered. "You've spent your life saving people. Ethan, maybe this time you have to save yourself and the dream you started before you ever met me." He took her face in his hands, his voice breaking. "You think I can just walk away? I don't think you can," she said gently. "But you have to try." For a moment, everything inside the room seemed to hold its breath. The sound of the rain grew softer, like the world itself was listening. Emma slid the sapphire ring from her finger. It caught the light one last time, that familiar, imperfect gleam, before she folded it into his palm. His hand closed reflexively around it. "Don't," he whispered. "Please don't." She looked at him, then really looked. The man who had built empires, the one who had taught her how to believe in herself, the one who had once said love was respect. And she saw in his eyes not the power or the pride, but the vulnerability he'd spent his life hiding. Tears slipped down her cheeks, silent and slow. "You once told me love is about making the other person better," she said softly. "Maybe this is how I do that." "Emma," she reached up, pressed her fingers against his lips, stopping the word. "Save your company. Ethan, save the people who trusted you. Save the dream that made you who you are." Her voice broke. "And when all this is over, if destiny still has room for us," she took a breath, steadying herself, "we'll find each other again." The silence that followed was the kind that filled everything: the air, the heart, the soul. Ethan didn't move. He didn't breathe. He only stood there as she stepped back, her hand falling from his. Outside, the rain eased to a drizzle. The city beyond the window pulsed faintly with light. Emma turned toward the door, her heart pounding so hard it hurt. When she reached the threshold, she looked back once more. He was still standing there, the ring gleaming faintly in his hand, his expression unreadable in the dim light. "Emma," he said finally, his voice barely a whisper. She forced a small smile through the tears. "Goodbye, Ethan." Then she opened the door and stepped into the rain. The cold hit her immediately, soaking through her coat, through her hair, through every fragile piece of her resolve. She didn't run. She just walked one slow step after another until the house disappeared behind her and the world became nothing but gray and water and ache. Somewhere behind her, a man stood alone with a ring and a decision that would break him. Somewhere ahead, a woman tried to convince herself that sacrifice was another form of love. And in between them, the rain kept falling quiet, endless, merciless, washing away everything except the promise they both silently made. If fate ever softened, if the storm ever ended, they would find their way back. Winter came quietly to Vermont. The snow lay soft across the fields, untouched except for the small trail of footprints that led from the old farmhouse to the barn. Inside, the smell of hay and wood smoke mingled in the cold morning air. Emma stood by the window, her hands wrapped around a chipped mug of coffee, watching the light rise over the hills. It was the kind of dawn she had grown up with, unhurried, honest, a world away from boardrooms and press cameras and the hum of city ambition. It had been 6 months since she'd left Boston, 6 months since she'd walked away from the man who once made the whole world feel small and vast all at once. In the beginning, the silence had been unbearable, the kind that pressed against her chest until she could hardly breathe. She'd filled her days with work, helping her father repair fences, baking with her mother, tending to small things that didn't ask for more than what she could give. And slowly, without her noticing, the silence stopped hurting. It began to heal. The sapphire ring, the one from Margaret, still rested on a chain around her neck. Some days, she forgot she was even wearing it. Other days, she caught herself touching it, like a heartbeat she couldn't quite let go of. Letters had come from former colleagues, from Lily, even from Margaret once, but not from Ethan, not one, and yet, somehow, she knew he was out there, still building, still leading, still fighting storms that most people would never see. Sometimes, late at night, she'd catch a headline while flipping through channels. Blake Innovations rebounds after corporate crisis. A brief glimpse of him walking out of a building, surrounded by cameras, his face calm, unreadable. She'd sit there for a moment, smiling faintly through the ache, then turn off the TV and let the quiet fold around her again. One morning, while sorting through the mail, she found an envelope with no return address. Inside was a small card plain, unmarked except for a single line written in Ethan's handwriting. The house in Charlestown still waits for you. No signature, no plea, just that. Her fingers lingered on the words for a long time. She didn't cry. She didn't need to. The tears had already been shed long ago, and what remained now was something gentler, a quiet understanding that love doesn't always need to be lived to be real. That evening, she walked out into the snow, her breath visible in the fading light. The sky was clear, a deep blue fading to silver, stars beginning to pierce through. She thought about the house in Charlestown, the one with the old floors and the creaking stairs, the one that smelled like cedar and beginnings. She imagined it waiting, just as he said, dust gathering where laughter might have been. In her mind, she could almost see him there, standing by the window, hands in his pockets, looking out into the night the way he always did when he was thinking. And maybe, somewhere across the miles, he was doing exactly that. Ethan had kept his promise. He saved the company. He saved the people. He kept his world standing, even if it meant breaking his heart in the process. He'd refused Vanessa's marriage proposal, though it nearly cost him the board's support. Instead, he found another investor, another way, because that was what he did. He built from the ruins, piece by piece. And through it all, one thing never changed: the way he still looked for her in the quiet moments. Sometimes, in his office late at night, when the city was asleep and only the hum of machines filled the air, he'd take out the ring she had given back, the one that had once meant forever. He didn't wear it. He just held it, the same way he still held hope. In Vermont, spring came early that year. The snow melted, revealing green shoots beneath the ground, brave and small. Emma started painting again, something she hadn't done in years. Simple things, fields, barns, skies. She never showed them to anyone. They were just for her proof that she was still here, still becoming. One morning, her father found her standing at the fence line, watching the horizon. "You're thinking again?" he teased, his voice kind. "Always," she said, smiling softly. He studied her for a moment. "You know, sometimes life doesn't take things away from us. It just gives them back differently." She looked at him, the words sinking deep. "Maybe that's true," she said. That night, she took the sapphire ring from the chain around her neck and slipped it onto her finger once more. It no longer felt like a weight or a wound. It just felt right, like something that had found its place again. And as the wind rustled gently through the apple trees outside, Emma whispered, barely audible, "I'm ready, Ethan, whenever life is in Boston, miles away." Ethan stood by the window of his office, the city lights shimmering below. He looked down at his hand, where he still held the ring she'd once returned. For the first time in months, he smiled, not with triumph, not with regret, but with peace. He placed the ring back into its box and whispered to the empty room, "I'll wait. Some loves don't end. They just rest like the earth under snow, waiting for spring." And somewhere between Vermont and Boston, between two hearts that had once found and lost each other, the air softened, carrying the faintest promise that when all storms quieted, love would find its way home again. The world outside fell still. The night stretched open, wide and gentle, and in that stillness, where pain had turned to tenderness and distance had turned to faith, something began again, not loudly, just quietly, like the sound of snow melting under the first touch of morning light. Sometimes love doesn't win by holding on. It wins by knowing when to let go. This story reminds us that dignity and compassion often speak louder than passion itself. Emma and Ethan's journey isn't about wealth, success, or fairy tale endings. It's about learning that love, when true, can survive distance, time, and even silence. In life, there are moments when doing the right thing feels like losing everything. Yet those are the moments that reveal who we really are. Emma chose courage over comfort, kindness over pride. Ethan chose integrity over desire. And in the quiet that followed, both found a deeper peace, the kind that doesn't need applause to be real. For anyone who has loved, lost, or waited, this story is a gentle reminder. What is meant for us will return in its own time, once we've grown enough to hold it with grace. And until then, we can live with open hearts knowing that love, like spring after a long winter, always finds its way back to warmth. Thank you, dear listener, for spending this time with us and walking through this story with an open heart. If this tale touched you, if it made you feel, reflect, or believe a little more in love and kindness, please give it a like. Share it with someone who might need its warmth today. And don't forget to subscribe to our channel. Your support helps us keep telling stories that heal, inspire, and remind us all of the quiet beauty in being human. Until next time, take care, stay kind, and keep your heart shining.